Everyone, welcome back to the workshop. And today I have a little bit of a project. Still have the Ikier Master on the bench, and I had someone reach out. They're another maker. They have a diode laser. However, they're working on like a coin bank, and they're able to do most of it, but they need clear acrylic fronts, and they're unable to cut that with their laser. And their other source fell through. They reached out to me asking if I knew someone who could help. And I said, hey, let me go ahead and do that for you. And a number of people had been asking about acrylic, maybe a little more detail. I covered it a little bit in my review, but I thought since we've got this project, we'll jump in and go over it in a little more detail, taking a look at what you can do with this machine. So I'm going to give us some tips and tricks along the way, some things to do with this specific machine, but some in general for CO2 lasers and working with clear acrylic. So if that's something that interests you, you want to find out more, stay tuned. I'm going to jump right into it. So first off, let's really briefly touch on why a CO2 laser is better at cutting acrylic. Well, diode lasers emit a visible beam of light, and the acrylic struggles to absorb that unless it has a very dark and opaque color to it. Otherwise, the beam can just pass through it as if light going through a pane of glass. However, the CO2 laser emits an infrared beam. It's an invisible wavelength, and the acrylic, no matter whether it's transparent, clear, or colored, instantly absorbs that laser beam's energy, instantly vaporizing the acrylic. And so that's why it makes it so much better at it. So anytime you're dealing with multiple colors or especially clear, CO2 is going to win hands down. That doesn't mean you can't work with a diode laser. You're just kind of more limited to specific materials that are meant to work with diodes that tend to be darker and more opaque. Now, we also want to touch real briefly on the different types of acrylic. The two major types that you're going to find are cast and extruded. Now, extruded tends to be the cheaper stuff that you're going to find in the big box stores. It tends to have this kind of plastic clear mask on there. And the reason that it is more popular in big box stores is that it is cheaper to manufacture. They melt down pellets and they're extruded through a die, and then a bunch of rollers kind of form it into the shape. And it gives it a nice consistent layering, and it can be fairly strong, but it also has properties such as it'll form a grain in that extrusion process that can be a little disruptive when engraving. You can start getting imperfections, much like grain of wood. You'll start seeing kind of lines and a little bit of kind of waviness in your engraving. And those same fibers and kind of grain to the acrylic, when cutting, can cause micro fractures and imperfections that when they interact with certain solvents and cleaners or the acrylic cement itself, can actually spiderweb out and cause bigger fractures. So it's best to stay away from extruded acrylic when dealing with the lasers. The cast material is actually poured into molds, and you don't get that kind of stretching and that graining pattern, so you get a much kind of smoother frosted engraving and a less likelihood of those microfractures forming when you cut the material as well. A few tips on having success in cutting and engraving acrylic when working with your CO2 laser. Depending on the model you have, if you have a variable airflow, that can greatly help out the quality. So if you're doing an engraving, having minimal airflow just to kind of keep some positive pressure against that lens is going to help, but you don't necessarily want to blast that material around too much. And that can actually mar up and scratch the surface. But there's another trick you can do with that, in the fact that you can add some dish soap, just a real thin coating of that, just kind of smear that on. That will act as kind of like a transparent mask that easily washes away. So if you're doing a detailed engraving and want to have as clean of a quality as possible, definitely do that. I find that when I'm engraving with acrylic, I like to take the top mask off. Now, if I'm just cutting out acrylic, oftentimes I will leave the mask on because I don't want to get the flashback coming through and leaving little etches on the edges of the acrylic as well. That mask does help protect it. Now, depending on your design, you may also want to invert your image side to side and do it on the back side of your material. So you'd want to flip your cut around and also your image around. And that way the engraving is on the back side, and any like maybe the surface part, it's not going to be on the outside. It's going to be less likely to get scratched. It's be less likely to collect any oils or dirt and dust, depending on how it's handled. Just gives it a little more protection, and it's allowed to be cleaned a little bit easier. As far as cutting, you want to do some more tests. When I did the tests on this one with some 3mm acrylic, I think I was getting up around 13, 14 millimeters a second, closer to 90 and 100% power. And that's okay, but you may also notice that the edge isn't quite flame polished. A couple things to do there. If you have the capability, again, you might actually want to dial back the air. You do want it kind of helping clear out that cut, but if the air is cooling that cut down too fast as that laser beam is cutting through the acrylic, it turns that edge kind of molten, and if the air flow from the air assist cools it too fast, you can actually get kind of a little bit of lines. You can get the bottom edge where it's a little bit of kind of an edge. You really want that flame polished look. So dialing back your air can help, and also dialing back your speed. Just because you can get through it at 13, 15 millimeters a second doesn't mean it's going to leave as quality of a cut. So you may actually want to dial that back, maybe down to 10 millimeters a second. It's going to take a little bit longer, but you might get a cleaner edge. Other than that, having a knife bed versus a honeycomb is going to help reduce the flashback on there. And if you can even take out more blades so that it's just enough to support it, as minimal contact on the back side as possible. Or you can get maybe some clips into a honeycomb that hold the sides and elevate the whole piece. The only other thing is just make sure you're venting it properly. Acrylic fumes are not great to breathe in, so definitely it's great if you can vent it outside. If you can filter it beforehand, that's great too. If you're doing a lot of this and you're kind of in a residential area, be mindful of your neighbors as well. You don't want to dump that outside and have it just blowing into their backyard. Try to be a good neighbor in those situations. If you can filter it before dumping it outside, great, but just really kind of keep in mind the safety of yourself and the safety of people outside as well. All right, for this project, the sheets I'm using are 8 inches by 12 inches. And for the first ones, we're just cutting out some parts. So we are going to leave the masking on both sides, drop it in the laser, get it focused, then we'll jump into light burn and get it set up. Okay, we are in Lightburn. We went ahead and put our material in here. I'm going to go ahead and open up the file that they sent me for this, and it's going to be this piggy bank face plate for acrylic. It's just a simple outline shape here. And we're going to go ahead and grab the overlay from the camera. We did already focus the machine, so now we can start working with this. So they do want 4 of them, and these are about 4 by 6 and a little over 6 1/8 by just under 4 inches. So we should be able to at least get 2 of them on here. So I'm going to go ahead and place this one in here. We'll make a copy and bring this over here as well. These can be fairly close. You don't want them too close. Sometimes that can cause some issues, but this looks pretty good. So for this first one, very basic cuts. We do know from our tests for my review that we can go up to about 13 millimeters a second, maybe even 15 for this type of material if we want to run it at max power. But I want to back that off a bit. We're going to try to get a little more of a polished look. We're going to go at 10. We will stick with 90% power and 10. We're not going to adjust the Z offset or anything like that. We'll just blast through this. Hit OK, and this is not going to take too long here. It's saying about 1:42 to do these cuts. This one's super simple. Let's go ahead and send it off to the laser. Take a look at it when it's done. Right, they do look good. They dropped right out, and our edge is looking pretty good. I don't know if you can see that. I'll try to put an overlay on there, but It's a pretty clean edge. It could possibly be a little more polished, but I think for this case where it's going to be inside a frame, it's more than good enough. And of course, we had the masking on there, which not only protected it from any flashback, because you see, we do have just a little bit there. The vapors can start a little bit of, if you're not careful, you can get fires and such, so it can have a little bit of a soot on there, as well as wherever the bars are sitting, you can get a little flashback. But that was protected by that, and has a nice benefit of protecting and shipping. So we also have kind of our leftover sheets. So this could just be scrap, but we got some decent material here. This is a little over an inch up here, and we got, maybe, I don't know, I mean, it's 8 inches wide by maybe almost 3 inches tall. So let's see if we can do a little more playing around with this to use up the scrap pieces on here. And we'll check out some more of the acrylic cutting capabilities of the Ikier Master. For these, I am going to be doing some engraving, so I want to take off this cover. And another good sign of kind of some quality acrylic is when this doesn't stick so hard. I've had some where this is just super sticky. It tends to be hard to pull off. It tends to leave residue, and that can also cause more issues when you engrave or cut through this. But this came off nice and clean, means that we can keep this top part fairly clean. But we're going to be engraving, so I definitely wanted to remove that. So we're going to start working with this bottom piece down here. All right, so for this first one, I want to play around with making a ruler out of that kind of long, narrow piece. And there's online, you can find this vector ruler generator. I'll try to put a link down to it below, but it creates some nice SVG files with your rulers. And so you've got some options. You can choose your starting and ending number here. You can choose your height. So we're going to be making this a little bit smaller. So I'm going to change that to 0.5. And then you can change do you want just 1/4 inches? Do you want 1/8 inch segregation? You can go on up from there. And you can also change from inches to centimeters. And then you could also change that to decimal to work with the metric system. So I'm going to generate a couple of these, about 10 inches. So we're going to go 10 inches. If we were going to go metric, we would go up to about 25 centimeters to have the equivalent. And then we're going to work with them in Lightburn to kind of create a clear, transparent ruler. All right, so here is the file that I've got in Lightburn. I created a 10-inch by 1/2 inch. Actually, I think I scaled this down to about 0.3 inch. So 10 inches by 0.3 inches, and we've got 0 to 10 on there, and then went from 0 to 25 on the centimeters. That's about a 1/4 inch tall. And I went ahead and made sure I lined them up. So if you come over to this side where you have kind of that squiggle line, you can actually drop a guide in. And I wanted to make sure that they were aligned that way. So I want them to, they'll be kind of the same measurement. You can compare, if you've got 1 inch, you're going to be at about 25.2 centimeters. And it's kind of a nice guide for those of us in the US that, maybe you grew up with imperial markings and measurements, but you're trying to do your best to also convert to metric. Having a ruler like this helps. I did not start it at the beginning because this is more of just kind of an overlay. So it's going to have limited, capabilities there, but went ahead and just drew a box around it and then just a little circle in the end. That way, if we want to hang it up or whatnot, but just a simple little, import those two vector graphics, draw a box, draw a circle, and we're really ready to go. So let's go ahead and refresh our background, make sure that this is going to fit onto our piece of acrylic. There we go. We've got that in line, and then we'll be able to drag this down here, and that's going to fit in nicely on the bottom and use up some of that material. All right, so we've got this in here. We need to make adjustments to our power and speed. So what I've found with the engraving for vector kind of solid fills, I was around 350 millimeters a second and around 35% power, but these are going to be line engraves. And so I want them to show up well. I don't want them to have interruptions. We're going to slow the laser down just a little bit just to ensure that these numbers engrave well and that we get a good marking on these. So we're going to go with 250 millimeters a second and 40% max power. And then for our cut, I'm going to go ahead with this one. And we should be good at 12 and 95% power as well. That should get us through this material. And we want to make sure we got our cut after our line engraved. So this is all good to go. I'm going to go ahead and send it off the laser. We'll check it out when it's done. All right, so it did complete. You can kind of see the etchings on there, and I'll put an overlay to really kind of make it show, because the clear background that's going to be one of the caveats of this. Is it's going to be less contrast between these. Now I did have to run this twice. The second time, on the second piece, I ended up lowering the etching engrave to 200 millimeters a second, because on the first one they were just a little faint, and it was probably that laser just having to fire and stop too quickly. So, but other than that, it came out pretty well, and they're legible. As a matter of fact, I even took some of the orange safety acrylic that I have some scraps of and cut one out on there just to try that as well. A little more contrast on that, but kind of the same effect. And the nice thing with these is you can put them on top of something. You can get those lines up at 0, and you can kind of measure and get both metric and imperial measurements on there. You can see through the ruler, so you kind of lay it right on top of what you're trying to measure and get that checked out. So nice way to use up a little bit of that scrap acrylic. Now we do still have one more chunk left in there that we can do something with. So let's jump back into Lightburn and see what I can come up with to use up the rest of that material. All right, we're back in Lightburn. I've brought in the college logo that I work for, because I think we got just enough room in there to make a little edge-lit sign. I've got some of these kind of USB or battery-operated bases you can pick up on Amazon and such. So I figure we could go ahead and work with this. So first thing I'm going to do is let's see what size we can work with. We're going to update the overlay. I went ahead and dropped in a piece, and it happens to be right about in the right spot. So I've got our logo brought in. I've already set it to fill, so it's easier to see. I do want to make sure that this is grouped. So when I'm doing these, as I mentioned earlier, I like to engrave on the back side. And so I think it looks better. It looks a little bit cleaner with that kind of front face just being nice and smooth. So we do want to mirror this horizontally. So you can just click this button, it'll flip it for you that direction. Now these bases that I have, I think the slot in them, I make some little 3D printed adapters for this thinner acrylic. I think we need to be about 2.65 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a box. We're going to put that over on the black layer. And then we're going to come up here. We're going to adjust the width to 2.65. So that needs to shrink down like that. And then this will also need to shrink down. You could probably do that at 2.3. Now we do want it to sit down into the base, and I don't necessarily want these sharp edges. So I'm going to actually unlock the aspect ratio. We're going to add a little bit of height to this. So we're going to make this, it's 3.6 now. We're going to make this 4 inches. And then I'm going to go ahead, we'll bring this down some, and that way this is going to stick into the bottom. And while we're at it, let's just go ahead and select both of them. We're going to center them vertically. Now I don't want the sharp edges, so what we can do is we can use our radius tool, and we're going to bump this up to, let's try 1/4 inch. And then we can go ahead and click in the corners we want a radius. This just keeps it from being sharp. Down on the bottom, it's fine. That'll just kind of help it slide in a little bit easier. Plenty of light from the LEDs to get there. And that should be about it. We've got our piece set up. It's going to use the bulk of this. But let's go ahead and just bump this down. That way it'll leave a little bit of scrap for maybe a test cut in the future. Now we need to go over here, of course, adjust our lines. This was the vector engraving, and during our tests we found, I believe, 350 millimeters a second and about 35% power was plenty. Bidirectional overscanning is good, and we want fill all shapes at once. That's good. Now we want our cut. Going to adjust this. Going to take that back down to the 12 and 95. That seemed to work well on the others. Hit OK. And now we can send it off to the laser. We'll see how it looks when it's done. And there you have it, nice and backlit, and actually pretty bright in daylight here. Of course, this one you can change the colors around, and there's a remote that'll let it kind of fade through them and such. It does work off of 3 AA batteries, and I did make a little 3D printed insert. I brought this up in an earlier video I did, but that just kind of helps with this thinner acrylic to set in there nice and snug. So just kind of a fun thing to add. I might give this to one of my staff or drop it off at the help desk for some fun. Rather than wasting the acrylic, you got another little thing out of here. So anyway, that's where I'm going to wrap this up here, but hopefully it showed you a little more of the capabilities of the Ikier Master with acrylic, and or just gave you some tips in general on working with clear acrylic and a CO2 laser. So if you have any questions or comments, go ahead and hit those down below. I'll definitely respond to those as best I can. Or as this came up, someone reached out to me with an issue and I was able to make a video out of it. So hit me up with those as well. Maybe we'll be able to use your idea in a future video. I'll have links to most of the stuff I use, the acrylic, the laser, of course, and some of the other things that if you want to use them as well, go ahead. I appreciate using any of those affiliate links, as that goes to support the channel, but also try to put links to some of the other files and generated stuff as well, so you can play around with them and see what you think as well. Want to thank you for watching this video. Hope you learned something. Hope you had some fun. Leave me a comment. Tell me what you thought about it. That helps the algorithm, shares this video out. And if you're still watching now, I know you're one of the faithful people that definitely support this channel. So I want to thank you, and we will see you soon in another one. But in the meantime, hope you get out into your workshop and make something too. We'll catch you next time.